say the word.
Hello. Hello everyone. Hope we're doing having a fantastic evening or wherever the fuck you are in the world. If you don't know who I am, I'm Zone, or better known as Stewart on Twitter. Welcome to the stream where we're going to be checking out what the Senate has to say about anime and manga. There we go. That's what I'm talking about. Look at that beautiful face almost on your screen. Look at that wonderful face of moi. So yes, we are looking at the Senate Environment and Communications Legislation Committee, Committee Room 2S3. Dinner suspension. Committee resumes at 19:35 Australian Eastern Daylight Time. Now, if I'm not mistaken, this was done yesterday, on Wednesday, 4th of March. Now, I didn't actually get around to watching it live because I was busy doing IRL shit, but this right here, we're going to be checking this shit out, so yeah. Let's see how this goes. Oh god, I'm already going to be friggin' regretting this, aren't I? Righto, where's the friggin'... I've currently got two monitors set up. I've currently got like the whole database and shit on this massive screen here, and I'm watching this on my laptop. So yeah, this is an interesting setup. Righto, so let's bring this up. Actually no, let's not bring it up just yet because there's potentially copyright music in this. 1935. So it should be starting any second, which means I can unmute it. Righto, come on. I really wish that I could skip forth in this, but you know, you get given what you're given. Oh, here we go. Let's get this shit on the radio. Hopefully I don't blow our fucking eardrums out.
The committee will resume with the classification board. Ms Anderson, welcome again. I understand that the opportunity to table your opening statement has been made to you. Do you have any comments that you wish to make at the start?
Not at this time. Thank you, Senator.
In that case, Senator Griff, you have the call.
Thank you, Senator.
Look, I'd like to start first by just asking what you see as the classification board's primary role.
It's to classify media content for Australians, and it's governed largely by the provisions that sit in the Classification Act for Australia, and as well as that you need to look at the National Classification Code, and we've got 3 sets of statutory guidelines that govern the classification of films, computer games and publications.
But that doesn't actually include all publications though, does it? It's just...
It includes what the Classification Act refers to as a submittable publication. So it's got a special definition that sits in Section 5 of the Act, and it is basically a publication that contains descriptions or depictions that are likely to cause the publication to be refused classification, or are likely to cause offence to a reasonable adult to the extent that the publication should not be sold or displayed in as an unrestricted publication. So it can still cause offence, but it just cannot be at an unrestricted level. It has to have a higher classification category, or are unsuitable for a minor to see or read.
Just on that, I don't know if they've changed it, but I remember reading up in the Queensland, in Queensland, if anything's not unrestricted in terms of publication, it's actually banned to be and to actually be displayed. I don't know if they've changed that. I'm guessing they have, but I'm not too sure. We'll have to look that up first. Actually, let's actually look that up instead of guessing. Let's look it up here. Righto, so classification. Go on the classification board website. Australian Government, Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Communications. And the reason why it is that is because the government recently combined a few of the departments together. Don't know why, but fucking NNP. They do whatever the fuck they want. Righto, so menu, classification ratings. What do we classify? Nope. Let's extend this out a little bit. About us. For classification, classification board, classification review board, and the classification branch. Advertise, show and sell. Friggin' hell, where is it? What we classify. Let's check this out. Yada yada yada. This is that. What do the ratings mean? Yada yada yada. Right. Here we go. This is what it is. Let's bring this up on screen. I'm just gonna close that down. Right, so right here. Publications which are classified Category 1 restricted and Category 2 restricted are publications for adults and they cannot be sold to minors and are not to be sold in Queensland under Queensland law. So here in Queensland, state law outlines that any form of restricted publications cannot be sold in Queensland at all. Not to anyone. They cannot be sold to anyone. They contain content that may offend some sections of the adult community, for example, nudity or explicit sexual content. Okay. Even though that us Aussies practically thrive off insults and offending each other. Weird flex by the Queensland state government, but what you gonna do about it? Well, let's continue on with this video. So
there are 3 classification categories for publications in Australia.
But it's up in relation to publications. It's up to the importer or distributor to determine whether it actually meets that criteria to be sent to you, though, isn't it?
That's largely correct, in the sense that the onus is on people to apply for a classification decision.
Okay. Yeah. So if you don't know about something, you just don't know about it, obviously, unless it's actually sent to you because someone has decided that that actually does meet that criteria. Okay. Yeah. On your website, you state that members of...
It's actually an interesting thing to bring up, like, why is it only publications that... And why is it only publications like, like comics and manga, etc., and novels and all that? Why are they the only ones that get that form of restriction, that form of leniency, that it can be sold without it actually being classified? Why is that? It's actually something that I've got to look up.
Well, I'll quote from it. Members are mindful of their statutory requirements to make decisions that are good in law. Does that include meeting the provisions of the criminal code?
Senator, we're not required to classify except in relation to the classification laws of Australia.
Hell yeah! Yep. They're not required to, so you can't use that fucking statement, Sterlo. You can't use that statement, mate. And it's that is oh, that is great.
Okay.
Having said that, the National Classification Code specifies what material must be refused classification.
Okay. So the criminal code itself doesn't bear into it. It's just basically what you're saying in relation to the classification laws. Okay, that's good.
Good. That's good, huh? That's good. That's good. Because it seems that you were really harping on that, Sterling. You were really harping on the fact that you're seriously trying to like harp on that fact of oh no, it's meant to be illegal and all that shit, and it's just like, and now you're saying it's good. Okay. Don't know why.
Do any of your members have any experience in statutory interpretation?
Senator, we all are trained in principles of administrative law when we start.
Okay.
And depending upon the background of members, some people have got that experience, some don't.
Sure. I'd like to now turn to the topic of anime, which you're well aware of, and with your media release.
Yeah.
Given that I actually raised it in the Senate last week. Now, it's clear that a small proportion, not all anime.
Okay. So, small a portion, not all anime, so you're pretty much contradicting what you said in the Senate, where you went like, all anime manga need to be re-revised, and because, I'm a fucking boomer. Can't even keep your fucking story straight, Sterlo. What the fuck?
Depicts child abuse, which falls under the criminal code, and I appreciate, as you said, that you don't work directly under that.
Good. Keep
But
that
the code
in mind.
states that representation of a person who appears to be under 18 and is a victim of torture, cruelty or physical abuse or engaged in sexual pose or sexual activity is an offence. Is that a concern to the board?
Senator, I think in terms of anime being a film form, it's important to appreciate that there will be stories that are told in film to which sometimes we will relate very easily as an audience member, and there will be other stories that are in films to which we may find ourselves not relating. Or
Just a second here. I've actually got to do something. I just gotta bring this up. Let's get this feckin' straight. Let's get this shit feckin' straight up for a second. Rightio. Let's get this freaking shit going. Jesus. What the fuck am I looking at on here? Oh well. Ooh, okay. Well, in the meantime, let's get back to watching this fucking video.
We could in fact find them distasteful. But what is important is to, I think, appreciate that anime is a film form and it is therefore classified under the classification laws. Now, there are certainly...
Hell yeah! So it pretty much disproves it. So that straight up disproves Stirling Griff's that statement right there disproves Stirling Griff's that isolation from criminal law, and part of his Senate speech. Once again, this is the second time that that his speech has just been outright fucking gone. It's just been outright disproven.
Occasions on which a film may exceed what can be accommodated within the G to R18 classification categories, and on those occasions, those films must be refused classification.
Okay. One example I'd like to which actually refer. One example I'd like to which actually refer to.
So that is understandable, but I am an advocate for abolishing the refused classification rating because that shit is just fucked. Like, I mean, think about it. We've already got laws in place to, not allow any of that shit to allow any like CP to get through our fucking borders or somewhere, or to be showcased to the internet. Like, fucking hell. Don't know why RC was introduced in the first place, but hopefully we'll find it in this video. I don't fucking know.
Your media release is Sword Art Online Extra Edition, which depicts the rape of a 17-year-old character called Asuna, in which her captor will also rape her in the real world when she is comatose in the hospital. Now,
wait. I gotta see this shit. Hold on. Sword Art Online Extra Edition. Wait, is this the one that I think it is? It is. Yeah. It's a freaking. It's the one that I'm thinking about. It's freaking. Freaking hell. Yeah, like. Yeah, like, I don't think there was any of that in there. Like, he could. I think he's referring to season 1, episode. Season 1, the second art of season 1 of SAO. I'm guessing because I don't remember a scene like that in Extra Edition. And even in the case of it being in the second art, the Alfheim Online arc, like it wasn't even an actual rape scene. So what the hell is he talking about? Sterlo. And you're the ones that the South Australians voted into the Senate. Although that's to be expected. I mean, South Australians are pretty shit.
Now, that scene in particular is not referred to at all in the board's decision report of 17th of October 2016. Why would such a graphic scene like that not actually be referred to in your decision report?
Senator, can I just ask you, Manga Sensei, was that the film to which you're referring?
Sword Art Online Extra Edition. Oh, is this ever Manga Sensei? Sorry, Margaret, but that's fucking hilarious. They're on two opposing ends. So what? How do you get Errormonger Sensei and Sword Art Online Extra Edition mixed up? Oh Jesus, that's great. Oh, that's a fucking me.
No Sword Art
Sorry,
Online
my
Extra
apologies.
Edition.
Yeah.
3, 4.
What we say in our decision report, Senator, is that the examples that we describe are not an exhaustive list of the content that has led to the classification decision.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
So the
I have read up on a few media releases, indicating their reports regarding a lot of films and not just specified to anime, but also to shows and movies. And for me, it's common knowledge. And for me, it's common knowledge that I know that it's not an exhaustive list, and now then it doesn't outline every single thing. It only outlines the specific, the most impactful parts. That's the one thing that I've recognized when I've gone through the classification database.
Expectation we have on our classifiers when they're creating their report is that they will feature in their report some of the most impactful content, that has led to the classification of that film. Now, there could be, and I would not know without viewing this film, again, there could be perhaps 50 different scenes in a product that goes for 101 minutes that have got impactful content at the classification level. It's not possible for us to write up all of those. So the onus is on the classifier to make the call about what is going to explain to people the classification decision. So on that occasion, this particular classifier has chosen what he or she has felt is impactful content to demonstrate the decision regarding the classification for that film.
I would think it's pretty impactful that a 17-year-old character is raped or told that they will be raped in the real world when they're comatose in a hospital. So I find it very surprising that that would be something that would be omitted by that particular person. Now, in your guidelines for classification of films, it states, and I quote, films will be refused classification if they include or contain any of the following. I'll go on, and it says descriptions or depictions of child sexual abuse or any exploitative or offensive descriptions involving a person who is or appears to be a child under 18, and it features gratuitous, exploitative or offensive depictions of incest, fantasies, other fantasies, and so on. Do you still believe that the classification board, rating of M for that particular movie is, that does describe the rape of a 17-year-old girl is the appropriate classification?
Senator, I've got to say to you that one of the most important principles to do with classification of media content is, in fact, context.
Yes! It was a matter of time. Yes! Context, my boy. Oh, my girl. Context. Context is immensely focused upon in the at the Australian Classification Board. Like if it's like if the context of a specific scene is justified, is reasonably justified, then it would be rated. Then it would be rated as such. It would be classified as such. So, that's. Oh, I was waiting for the context. Fucking rule to drop. I was fucking waiting for that shoe to drop.
And what we are looking at here is a story, and that is not to say that all stories are permissible, but what we are looking at here is an animated story. It is not live content involving an illegal criminal act. That is.
Yes! Yes! That's what we've been trying to fucking say! That's what we've been saying all along! Thank you! Thank you! Holy crap! Yes! The Australian Classification Board Director! Thank you! Thank you! You have said the things that us in the anime community have been talking about, and us in the entertainment industry have been talking about. Oh my god! Finally! Thank you, Margaret Anderson. Thank you.
It's been viewed. It's a story and typical of some Japanese anime. Those stories are hugely wide-ranging in their subject matter.
Yes.
And as peculiar or odd as Australian audiences may find it, it is not uncommon in some Japanese anime for children to be sexualised or for there to be storylines about the sexualisation of children.
That doesn't make it right, Ms Anderson, the fact that it is common, but we have here a situation where it certainly falls under the criminal code. I appreciate you don't work under that.
Then why do you continue to bring it up? If you know it, don't continually bring it up. They have stated they are not required to. Sterlo, what the fuck are you? I can feel my brain cells slowly exploding.
But under your own guidelines, it certainly falls under that, whichever way you look at that. And just going back as to your mention of real people versus others, I'll just refer to in 2015, an Adelaide man was convicted of possessing 361 anime classed as child pornography, and the judge held that the anime images were not a big leap to viewing child abuse materials of actual children, which in fact this person also had. So I mean, I find it quite shocking.
Where was it? Where was the court? At what courthouse did they do it in? Because that would be a state matter. Here's the thing. You cannot get punished for federal level crimes. We don't have felonies here in Australia. If you commit a crime in a state, if you commit a crime in that state, you are you are judged and you are convicted. You go through the process that state government has in place. You do not follow. You're not charged at a federal level. One of the oldest criminal codes, the Criminal Code Act of 1899, Queensland's criminal code. It was put into power before Australia even became its own federation, before it even became the Commonwealth of Australia, before federation. Queensland was way ahead of that shit. That is a state matter. And as we know, and as is expected, what is stated in one state does not automatically apply to another state. Each state has their own definitions, have their own punishments as to how it's been, as to what the crime they've committed is. Like, if they were somehow tried at a federal court, then it would be understandable. That would be a good point. But here's the thing. I have yet to see a criminal case that involves an act being committed in one state. And a crime that has been committed in one state to be taken up to the federal level. I have yet to see one. Civil matters, yes, I have seen them, but here's the thing. Australia doesn't have, there's no individual state civil laws here in Australia. Australia has one overarching, Australia has one overarching civil law, the Australian civil law. So no matter what state you're in, you're always going to end up at the federal court or the Australian circuit of federal courts. But here's the thing: those are for civil matters. Those are for torts. Torts. You know, like breach of contract, tortious interference. Friggin' defamation. Those kinds of things. Okay, let's see what Margaret's response is.
That your reviewer hasn't, in this particular instance, taken into account such a graphic scene. But I know I've got some time limitations here, so I'd like to just move on to manga, which is.
Manga. That's what you call it, manga. Oh yeah, mate, have you seen this manga? This anime and this manga. Oh my god. Manga. That's what you call it. Sounds like he's trying to say mango and manga at the same time. That's what it sounds like. Manga. Oh god. If you say that's right. Jesus Christ, you should just continue saying it because I'm just gonna laugh.
Which is obviously the Japanese graphic novels, which there is a proportion of child exploitation. And as you mentioned before, not all publications are actually submittable publications under the Act.
Yeah.
Why do you believe there's a distinction between the different media in relation to print and film?
Senator, also in relation to film, there is an obligation upon the film distributor to submit for classification. So there's no great distinction, if you like, between publication and film or computer games. It is on the person or company that is going to publish that film, and publish has got a very broad definition in the Classification Act. It is on the person who is wanting to publish it to get that material classified.
Okay. Does the board have the ability to investigate an issue on its own if a complaint comes from someone external from the organisation?
I think that would be up to the Classification Review Board. That would be up to the Classification Review Board, which is independent from the Classification Board. So here's how the classification branch is set up. There's the Classification Board. They're the ones that people go to. Then there's the Classification Review Board, which have longer standing members. So in the classification board, there are more members, but they're not there for a long period of time. They're there for like a couple of years or something. With the review board, however, there are less people, but their contracts are longer. At least that's how I read it. At least that's how I read it works. And it could be different, but you know. But the thing is, both of them are completely separate from each other. So the classification review board, and now the classification review board. And so classification review board receives a complaint that the classification board and now the misclassified or falsely classified something, and so that what they want to do is they want to see that they want to review what the classification board have done. They want to review the classification board's decision, and so the classification review board, which I'll now refer to here on as the review board or review board, what the review board does is it makes a completely new classification. They don't take any influence from the classification board. They instead make up their. They then review that they then view it from their perspective and not the perspective of the classification board. So the review board and the classification board are separate entities. And then once the review board is done with their is done, and now them viewing the content, and now they give their own classification. They give their own classification, and and they also submit the reasoning why, and they also but they also compare it to the classification board's decision. Now I know that they said that they don't. Now I know that I said that they don't take any influence, but what they do is make comparisons and differences between the two. So everything that the review board is at face value. What is at face value is at face value is under their own perception of it, and sometimes it's actually resulted in a lower classification. A good example is We Happy Few. So everybody knows We Happy Few. It's that game that came around where you have to take drugs and where you are pretty much almost forced, where you have the option to take this drug in game, and in order to not get caught and killed or anything like that. The classification board refused now RC'd it, so that game was banned. However, what the publisher did was they submitted a complaint and a review request and a revision of that game to the classification review board. And so the review board spent 2 days looking at the game, going through it, and they gave it an R18+ rating. Effectively overruling the classification board's decision to ban the game. The review board came in and said, nope, it is the drug use is in context. The drug use is in context, and here it is. And now then, it is no longer banned. It is available to be distributed. And that is the final point. Unless you go to the ministers. But I doubt that they'll respond to it unless there's a major uproar. Anyways, let's get back to this.
To an extent, Senator, in that if I receive a complaint, for example, about a classification decision, I will obviously inquire into that and reply. If you are asking if I receive a complaint about material that is not classified, then I can refer that to the classification branch. I don't have any enforcement powers. The enforcement powers under the classification laws vest in the states and territories, and that is because the classification system is a national cooperative scheme.
Okay, so there are no penalties that you're aware of, for a publisher or a distributor for not submitting a submittable publication?
No, that's not correct, Senator. There would be penalties that exist in the state and territory legislation regarding enforcement of the classification laws, and they would vary according to each state and territory.
Yes! Thank you! Oh my god! So that whole fucking Adelaide man got fucking charged with CP. Yes, it's at a state and territory level. Federal law is there for guidelines and as a cooperative scheme. But the thing is, you cannot be charged at a federal level. If you commit a crime in a state, doesn't matter if you commit a crime in your home state or interstate or across multiple borders. Or across multiple borders. You will be tried in each individual state and territory that you've committed the respective crimes in. So let's say that you shot a person, all right? Shot a person in Queensland. And a person being shot in Queensland isn't really that isn't really that rare. Now then. It really isn't that rare. Now, if you go down to like the Logan area or up to Aspley, and now then you'll see people getting mugged, shanked, shot, murdered, all the fun stuff. You see that all the time there. But then you go down and you commit, and you steal someone's vehicle in New South Wales, and then you go to Victoria and you run a bunch of people over. That is a reference to what happened in the fucking main street of Melbourne, main street of Melbourne, a few years ago. God, it was just a massacre. But so essentially, if you get arrested, you'll be charged in each of the different states, and you'll be charged in those 3 states' court systems. So you'll be charged in Victoria for running people over. You will then be you will also be charged in New South Wales for stealing a car. You will be charged in Queensland for shooting someone. That is how it works, and there is no sort of felony or federal crime that you can get charged with that you could commit, because at the end of the day, it is up to the states and territories. That's how it operates.
Now, since my written... Just 30 seconds, Chair. Since my written communication to the Minister for Communications last week highlighting this issue, can the Minister, representing the Minister for Communications, explain what action the government has taken on these issues?
Thank you very much, Senator Griff. Yes, I can. The Minister's obviously aware of your letter to the Attorney-General and has seen your letter. And I think it's safe to say that the government is very aware of the issues you raise. And I think this falls into, as you'd probably be aware, there is a review underway. So the government has got the review underway, and it's currently, as I understand it, it's led by Neville Stevens. It includes consideration of national classification codes and the guidelines, including the scope of classification categories. And we also do note that, in terms of what you were talking about, that under the Classifications Act currently, the board is not required to apply Commonwealth Criminal Code when making classification decisions, which I think goes at the heart of one of the 2 issues that you're raising.
Right. So on that, I'm going to bring it up here for a second. What I'm going to be bringing up is pretty much what they're talking about. So I gotta look up classification, media and news. Let's bring old mate up. Let's zero it down. Media releases. No, it's news. So, come on. Ah, man, come on. I know you can do this. Yeah, here we go. 12th of February 2020, final chance to have your say on Australia's classification regulation. Here we go. So, let's take a look at this for a second. Submissions on the future design of Australia's classification regulations are due by 19th of February 2020. And keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, this is on the Australian Classification Board's website, classification.gov.au/about-us/media and news/final chance, have your say, Australia's classification regulation. The consultation period for the review of Australia's classification regulation is ending soon, with the submissions due about 5 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Savings Time on the 19th of February 2020. If you would like to share your views, there is still time to provide a submission. Now here's the thing. I have submitted my view about it. I've submitted what my recommendations are, what my issues with it. And as you can see here, now an independent expert, Mr. Neville Stevens AO, is leading the review. So yeah, so pretty much what I've done is I've put forth my reasons. I've put forth what I recommend changes to, and provide reasonings as to why, and I summarize it all. That is essentially what is going on. And as you can see here, the review is looking at ways to develop a modern Australian classification framework that reflects today's digital environment and meets the needs of industry while continuing to provide appropriate information and protections for Australians. The review covers content delivery platforms, including broadcasting services, online stores and services, cinema releases and physical media, boxed video games and DVDs, and is also considering updates to the National Classification Code and classification guidelines. This is what they're referring to. They're referring to this review. And this is why I caused up a big stink about it on Twitter, because Stirling Griff must have realized that this was occurring, and so what he decided was he wanted to get his 2 cents in, and he wanted it, but instead of submitting it like everybody else would, like I did, he decided to submit it. He decided to do it through the Senate by doing a massive fucking speech about it. So, yeah. Well, anyways, but yeah, that right there is what they're talking about. So, let's just get back to this.
So the submissions are currently being assessed by Mr. Stevens, and under the terms of reference, he's to provide a report back to the Minister next month.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Senator Green.
Ms Anderson, the government's review of Australian classification regulations has been a long time coming. The consultation paper notes that the media market has significantly changed since the National Classification Scheme was enacted in 1995, and the current system was not designed to manage media convergence and all of those issues that come with it. In what ways does media convergence present challenges for the Classification Board?
I'd certainly refer you to the submission that the Classification Board itself has contributed. Those submissions were all uploaded to the internet last night, so they're now publicly available. Certainly you are increasingly finding there is less distinction between what we traditionally view as the 3 standard media delivery types, i.e. publications, films and computer games. Mm-hmm. So, for example, you had the product, the media item called Bandersnatch that featured last year. On Netflix, it was variously described as an interactive film and an interactive game. So one of the things that it then raises is that currently we have got 3 sets of statutory guidelines. one each for films, computer games and publications. If you are now getting very clouded lines between how do you define a film, how do you define a game, that absolutely highlights the need to address the absolutely fundamental structure of how you classify media law in a convergent era.
And how has the board adapted to accommodate these new issues?
We absolutely recognise it is not possible for human beings to continue to classify all content quickly. So several years ago, the board and the classification branch signed on to something called the IARC, the International Age Rating Coalition.
Yes.
Which is an online system that classifies computer games that are delivered to your mobile phone or digitally downloadable. And that tool classified last year over 317,000 computer games. Now, it would not be possible for the board to classify that number of games in a year.
Oh, hell no. Oh, hell no. Hell no, it wouldn't. Even for a classification freak like myself, who likes the classification system because it pretty much puts an FU to everyone who complains about, like, oh, no, it was advertised to be for children, or oh, no, it's too offensive. The reason why I like the classification system and it being ran by the government is because it is a good way of just saying, look at the classification rating, this is what the government said, fucking deal with it, and if you don't like it, don't fucking watch it. That's the main reason I like the classification system. But I hate the refused classification rating. I hate it. So yeah, let's just continue on with that.
The worth of something like the IARC tool is great because we spent the best part of 18 months with the developers getting the algorithms right. So the IARC tool is something known as a SIMO, single input, multiple output. So Australia is one of a number of international jurisdictions that subscribe to IARC. And what is important is that when, for example, a games developer or publisher, you have answered the questions, you press your submit button, you are then being given a classification that is weighted and absolutely homogenised to Australia. So you're getting an Australian classification, you are also getting a classification for the other jurisdictions who participate in IARC.
Okay, if I take you back to the review that's being undertaken at the moment, we've had a number of reviews in this space. The Australian Law Reform Commission review in 2012, the Convergence review, the ACMA review in 2017, the Online Safety review and the Digital Platforms Inquiry that have all covered off issues that affect the board and classification more generally. Will the current review be a review that leads to substantive reform and modern classification framework?
That is certainly a matter for the terms of reference for the review. And certainly it was the intention of this review that it would be focusing on the harmonisation of classification.
Senator Green, can I just add to that? As has already been observed, the National Classification Scheme is a cooperative arrangement subject to not just the Commonwealth but also all the states and territories. So under the Intergovernmental Agreement, changes to the scheme must be considered by the Councils of Attorneys General. So the Commonwealth Government is very optimistic that will lead to change. But again, I would just make the point that has been made several times, it is not just an issue for the Commonwealth Government.
Okay. Is this review overdue given the vast changes in technology that have taken place?
I think there have been a number of developments that the classification branch has initiated over the last few years to address some of the more pressing issues around classification in the digital age.
In your submission that you're referring to, that was uploaded or made public last night, is that right? Yeah.
Along with all of the other reviews, all of the other submissions to the review, yes.
Yes. Your submission refers to the board being broadly supportive of the harmonisation of classification of media content regardless of media type or delivery. That's
Yes.
right. Okay, great. And why do you support harmonisation?
Because certainly the current classification laws that we had were written in an analogue age. They were written long before we even had things like digital TV, let alone the degree of media content that is now available for immediate streaming and downloading.
Think about that for a second. These classification laws were made in an age before digital TV was introduced to Australia. And before digital TVs in Australia became widely accessible and became the go-to, and pretty much became the standard for Australian households. This was made during when analog TV was just starting to lose its passion, whatever the fuck. These laws were rated during a time when it was so much more easier, and when things like this was during the time when Steam wasn't even widely accessible, before it made billions upon billions of dollars per year. This was before Disney Plus came out. This was before Netflix was even introduced to Australia. Those are the main reasons why. And the vast expansion of entertainment, of video, of games, films, and novels and comics, comics, and mangas, and the vast expansive and the digital era and like online content and the ease of accessibility, thanks to the interwebs. If you guys know where that line is from, from a specific YouTuber. Conversations. Yeah. Yeah. This is the main reason why, and it's because of that reason why they get Australian Classification Board. And I gotta be honest, I've got to agree with her here. The harmonisation would take so much more. The harmonisation would take so much weight and would take so much weight off of the Classification Board's shoulders. Because here's the thing, they have to classify novels, comic books, and manga from one set of legislation. They've also then got to review films and animes, and shows from another act, and they've also got to classify video games under a third act. So you think about it for a second. Having to read through books and comics, reading it over. You've then got to go. You've then got to go and review video games. You've then got to review films and then animes and then shows. Imagine trying to fit that into from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. in this day and age, thanks to the internet. Imagine how tough that would be. And the thing is, here in Australia, like, content cannot be released until, and aside from unsubmitted publications, cannot be released to Australia until it's been classified. But because of the internet, and now that unclassified content is being allowed, is easily being reviewed. But, and now here's the thing, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I mean, interspecies reviewers is a good one. Oh, I love me some interspecies reviewers. Fuck yeah! Give me those elves any day of the week.
you have had a complete change in the way Australians view even their television content. And with the advent of online streaming services, there has been a complete change in the way films, what we will traditionally view as films, are available and viewed in this country. There has been a huge explosion in the number of computer games available and the broad breadth and increasing crossover between those two traditional media types.
Just moving on to, we're talking about a media particularly enjoyed by children and adolescents. In your submission, or you might have broadly made these statements before, you support the addition of a new classification category for content that sits between the PG and M categories. Is that right? And why is...
Yeah, oh my god! Yes! Yes! Wait, no. I gotta see this in whole. Okay. I'm getting a little bit too ahead of myself.
What's the reason behind that?
There's several reasons for that. Firstly, there has been a concerted effort by creatives, so those are the people who actually make media entertainment. There has been a concerted effort for them to focus in on a young person's market. So we've just had Berlinale completed. So the Berlin Film Festival is one of the top 3 international film festivals in the world. They have, for a number of decades now, had 2 categories of films that they promote very strongly each year. One is Generation K, so think very little, like kindergarten, and the other one is a young person's category. And the whole intention behind the young person film category is to be provocative and to encourage young people to engage in the world and to think about issues and to confront them in a way that probably they weren't looking at, and with stories that were not being told even 20 years ago. The other thing that the board has noticed, particularly in the last sort of 5, 6, 7 years, is an increasing pervasive use of dark themes. So recent Walt Disney film Maleficent, we recently had Maleficent 2 come out, but the first Maleficent film, very dark themes running through that, and that's not uncommon. You'll get that also in a lot of action violence films, and there's an increasing level of action violence, that is directed at young people. So the problem we have at the moment is that we've got a PG category, which is parental guidance recommended. We then have an M category, which says the M stands for mature. So you are actually expecting that content requires a mature perspective. And what we have found at the board is that you often don't require a mature perspective to interact with that media, but the impact has gone above mild, which is what the impact level is for a PG.
So, look, I'm certainly not an expert in these matters around child development, but will there need to be some interaction with child development experts to develop that new structure in a way that means that the right content is being classified in the right way?
The board isn't of that opinion. What we have tried to do in our submission is to suggest a structure which is giving parents and guardians a greater level of understanding of the kind of material that would be involved in those categories. And we're suggesting that it be left up to parents and guardians who know their children and young people best, and to allow them to make an informed decision.
Yes, please. Enforce that. I'm sick and tired of parents always saying, but this M show for my kids, it wasn't what I was expecting. Oh my god. Then why did you buy an M-rated product? My god. You're a dumbass. Now, if they could abolish the refused classification, oh my god, that would be... I would lose my fucking mind.
About what is appropriate for their child or young person.
If there's an increase in the level of the amount of classifications. Is there a risk that, and having new categories goes against general support for simplification of consumer advice, a need to make it as simple as possible for people to make the right choices?
I think there's two issues that you've run together there. One is the classification categories and the other is consumer advice. So we're required to always provide consumer advice, and the consumer advice is there to indicate to people what the most impactful content of that media content is.
Yeah.
So the two are separate but joined. So if we had an additional category...
Right, so what she's talking about now, that could seem confusing, but what she's talking about is the actual classification side of things and the consumer advice. So I'm going to use Infinite Stratos here for a second, and now then my guilty pleasure anime. Fucking guilty pleasure, fuck yeah. Hang on, I'm going to change this to full screen for a second. Oh my god, I look ugly. Nah, what am I talking about? I look sexy, and now take a look at this sexy face. Oh man, this is. I know the ladies want this. Nope. Right, so pretty much what she's talking about is. Right, so Infinite Stratos right here. Right here, it's rated M. That's the classification. This right here is the consumer guidelines. This is what she means by they're separate but joined. And then of course on the back you got this. So it says recommended for mature audiences. Oh my god, come on, focus on the. Okay, no, it doesn't want to focus. But yeah, it says here recommended for mature audiences. And here's the thing. M is not a restricted classification. It is an advisory classification. But of course, and now then, so pretty much what she's saying is, this is exactly what she's talking about. They're separate. They are separate, but they're joined. That's what she's talking about. So if you ever hear that, and now then, just know that, just know that that's what she's talking about. But now here's the thing. I know that a lot of Aussies would be like, oh yeah, mate, you didn't need to fucking tell me that. Yeah, but here's the thing. Americans, the British, the Scottish, the fucking Irish, the Canadians, the Japanese, the Chinese, the Vietnamese, and now everywhere else around the world, they wouldn't understand. They wouldn't understand this this sort of concept, or if they are familiar with this kind of concept, they would seem somewhat confused by what she said. So this is more just for people who, if they somehow watch this around the world. So yeah, let's get back to this.
That is not going to impact upon the consumer advice. That is simply going to give an additional classification category.
You also support oversight by a single and independent government regulator. What additional powers would this body need that you don't have already?
I don't think so much that is an issue for the board. That is certainly an issue for government, but certainly the board in its submission said yes, it did support a single regulator, with that single regulator basically assimilating all of the disparate powers that are spread amongst a number of agencies at the moment relating to regulation of content. So there are certainly things that the board does not do, for example, in the compliance space, but there are others who do that already. So the board would view that the single regulator would have a holistic approach to the management of media.
Okay, and one of those regulators is ACMA, and there are proposals to expand.
And now, just in case anyone wonders what ACMA is, it's the ACMA. It is the ACMA, ACMA, which is the Australian Communications and Media Authority. The ACB and the ACMA are, and they both do classifications. But here's the thing: the classification board and the classification review board, they do content that is designed for selling that is designed for selling and online content. The ACMA, Australian Community, and our ACMA and our ACMA, ACMA, Australian Communications and Media Authority, they're the ones that they are the regulators of the internet, but they do not do internet classifications. But they present a code of conduct when it comes to classification for television content. So here in Australia, before any form of before any form of entertainment is presented on screen, there's usually a classification in consumer preset that is presented to the audience on television. And the ratings on, and here's the thing, the ratings on television can be different than the ratings that is on the that is on the boxes that are on TV, on the DVDs and Blu-rays, etc. in stores. Yeah. So, and also the ACMA can also, but you can also, the ACMA is, pretty much the ACMA. The Australian Classification Board and the Review Board do not touch television broadcasts. That power is under the ACMA, under ACMA.
ACMA's remit to include the functions of the Classification Board and the Classification Review Board.
Oh, yeah.
What issues does that proposal raise, and can you see any pros or cons either way? I mean, do you have a view about whether that's an appropriate way to go to have a single regulator?
The board certainly in its submission supported a single regulator. What government decides to do is a matter for government.
All right. How is the community involved in the work of the Classification Board? Are members of the board drawn from the general public?
Absolutely.
Public?
Absolutely. And they're drawn from across Australia. So when we appoint permanent board members, we advertise Australia-wide, and people are assisted to relocate to Sydney for the duration of their appointment. Mm-hmm. Sydney for the duration of their appointment.
Mm-hmm. What are the typical terms of, sorry, not the terms of reference, but what are the criteria to be a board member?
There's nothing that requires you, for example, to have a background in media. In fact, far from it. What you need are to have skills whereby you are able to apply a set of statutory prescriptions in an operational context. You've got to have great attention to detail, an ability to analyse and an ability to reason and to make a decision that is good in law.
Do you take into account...
Righto, dinner's ready, lads. I'll be right back. We'll continue this on very soon. Okay, never mind. That doesn't need to happen. My brother, thank you very much, has graciously presented me with some potato scallops and chips. Some people eat popcorn when they're watching a content such as this going down. Us Aussies eat chips and either potato scallops or fish, or a dag dog. Depends on your taste.
Is already on the board, so there's broad representation across the board of the community.
We will advertise, and then it is literally open to whomever applies at the time. So we're conscious always of trying to maintain a gender balance on the board, but it is absolutely, we're at the whim of the Australian public and who decides to apply on any given occasion.
Okay. There's also been some proposals, finally, about industry self-classifying content across all platforms, and that the proposal is that that would be overseen by an Australian government regulator. In regards to that proposal, does the board have any views?
Certainly at the moment there are already some aspects of industry self-regulation, so I've already referred to the IARC tool. There's also the Netflix classification tool. We initially classified Netflix products, but they then sought to have their own tool that was to be standardised to Australian values. So that was piloted, it was successful, the government has allowed that tool to continue in operation. In addition to that, there are already and have been running for a number of years now authorised assessor schemes under the Classification Act. So, for example, one of the most common ways for a television series to be classified is for an authorised assessor, so that is somebody who has been trained in classification standards by the board and the branch and who has been authorised by me as director to be an industry assessor. That person has to view that content and then make a report addressing the 6 classifiable elements and put forward a recommended classification and consumer advice to the board. Now, the board, when we get that, we review that report and we can either vary it, reject it or amend the recommended classification. And we will do that.
It's already happening, but how is it working?
Fairly well, because the board is undertaking an auditing function in relation to that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if there's no other questions, thank you. If you took any questions on notice, the date for returning answers is Friday the 17th of April.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Henson. We will now go to officers from Screen Australia.
Rightio, so it appears that on the 17th of April there's going to be responses. Let's just go back this.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if there's no other questions, thank you. If you took any questions on notice, the date for returning answers is Friday the 17th of April.
Thank you.
Friday the 17th of April, that is when the responses to the questions will be showcased.
Thank you, Ms Henson.
We've got about a month.
We will now go to officers from Screen Australia. Mr Mason, welcome to you and your team. I understand you've had the opportunity to table an opening statement. Are there any remarks you wish to make?
None at all, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. In that case, Senator Smith or Senator Green? Senator Green, you have the call.
Hello.
Evening, Senator.
Mr Mason, sorry to start off with a really basic question, but whereabouts is Screen Australia based?
Based in Sydney, we have a second office in Melbourne.
Okay. Whereabouts in Sydney are you?
Ultimo.
Okay.
We're not very far from the ABC and in fact not very far from Channel 10 and not very far from the Australia Council. There's a whole slew of us in one line.
It's a very convenient location.
It is.
There are a number of very large international productions filming in Australia at the moment. I know, being a Queenslander, that we certainly have some of those productions happening in the Gold Coast particularly.
Queenslander,
Can you outline what some of those productions are that are filming now, and then into the future, what are the plans?
Obviously, the thing you're probably referring to in Queensland is Baz Luhrmann is doing an untitled Elvis Presley project, which has taken over the entire Gold Coast studio, the Village Roadshow studios. And that's an extraordinary thing because that's got an enormous profile globally. Tom Hanks has been seen all over the Gold Coast eating, drinking, which I'm going to admit again at this moment, it's very useful. We're able to help tourism and other people shine a light at this very second. So we're thrilled to do that. Dr. George Miller is about to start shooting his new film in Western Sydney. And we just in Western Sydney, yeah, because the Fox studios are fully booked. They have 2 Marvel films back to back going on in those.
Okay.
So Dr. George, for the first time probably, is operating in much more make-do facilities. That's probably terribly offensive to the people who've put it all together. Studio Docklands in Victoria has several things good to go, and they just at the end of last year had Shantaram, and they also had